Hi people! Over the past few months since I first released it, I've come to find my previous video going into art markets lacking a bit in real substance. There were some things I didn't really go into as much as I had wanted to, or at all, and so it ended up not quite as helpful as it could have been. I've decided I'm going to redo it and give you a real, proper deep dive, covering as much as I possibly can in one shot. So, let's do that. Just as an aside, I've privated the previous version of this video because I don't want there to be any confusion as to which one to watch, but if you have the link, you should still be able to see it. I don't plan on deleting it outright as of the making of this video. I've done my best at chaptering each section to make it easier to skip around to specific parts if you're only interested in one or two, or if you want to revisit any in the future. If you're having any trouble with this, just let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to fix it. And lastly, just to clarify a little bit, this is going to be a general guide on strictly art markets and vending at events of that nature. This is not going to be a guide on how to create or run your business, so you'll find this a lot more useful if you already make or do something and just want to start getting into in-person market selling. This is also just what I've personally learned and experienced over the past couple of years, and I highly encourage you to read/listen to other vendors' takes too. Alright, so for starters, the first step actually has nothing to do with the markets themselves, but with yourself and your overall brand. Who are you, and what is it that you do or make? Who is your target audience? Who will really connect with you, and what are the best ways you could facilitate this? For example, I'm an independent artist, and I use that art to create items primarily in the vein of general accessories, both for the self and the home. This includes things like stickers and art prints, but also patches, keychains, and bookmarks. My art also leans very distinctly into gothic and alternative territory, with recurring motifs like skulls, occult symbols, and things of that nature. Taking all of that into account, I usually look and sign up for events that are as complementary to all that as I could get. So, punk flea markets and events that are specifically Halloween themed are my biggest go-tos, but I've also done a lot of markets with places like local skate parks, roller derby matches, and independently owned stores and collectives. This doesn't mean that you can't ever go outside your genre, because I definitely have, but you just want to put a little thought into where you'll find more of your audience. There's a lot of craft fairs by me, but I wouldn't really fit in with a lot of them just due to the subject matter in my art. I'm from the East Coast, so people attending those are usually looking for a little more low-key vibe, like beach art, sea glass jewelry, candles, and things of a more quote-unquote family-friendly genre. And there's nothing wrong with that, it just means that I probably shouldn't partake as a seller there. What you might be surprised to find as you come into vending for the first time is just how many of these things are small scale, run by individual people or small groups. This is obviously going to be a case-by-case basis depending on where you live, but I can't recommend enough that you look in places you might not normally think of. Social media is a huge factor nowadays, of course, but I've actually found the bulk of my connections through in-person interactions. And this is through not only vending at markets, but just attending them when I've got the time to as well. Now, you shouldn't be interrogating anyone or trying to force someone to spill all their knowledge on you, but vendors at markets are usually pretty willing to chat for a bit about their experience and how they found that particular event. Just be nice. I've had a lot of people ask me while they browse my table about how I got involved and what the story is behind the event, who runs it, etc. And I've always been happy to share, because at the end of the day, we're the ones that are going to keep it alive. Your local art and maker scenes can't survive without people, and the more people who know about what's going on in their community and how they can get involved and help, the better. Community is everything. It's equally important to remember to talk to your fellow vendors at events you do get into. I've met so many amazing people through my journey, and the collective knowledge they've brought to me can never be fully measured. I really do owe where I am now to the people that have generously shared their wisdom and guidance with me along the way, and even outside of that, you never know who might end up becoming a good friend. As far as social media, I've seen a lot more from active markets on Instagram than anywhere else, but that's just as of the making of this and could change at any point in the future. It's currently my second top method of finding markets, second only to in-person connections, but running parallel to this is the fact that I usually add these in-person connections to my socials. So even if we're not actively vending together, we stay connected and can trade market leads back and forth and just check in on how everybody's doing. Pay attention to story posts, especially if the app has one, because a lot of events will make posts specifying when applications are open and how to apply on their own page, which will then get shared around. You can also use area or market-specific tags to find leads, ones like #ArtMarket or #NYEvents I've used before, but I won't lie, I tend to find it to be a little more trouble than it's worth for the most part. That's not to say it's impossible to find something good through this, and I actually have in the past found a couple that I looked into applying to, but it's just probably going to be more difficult than other methods of searching, depending on how the tagging system works on the app you're using. Outside of socials, I've also been known to do a simple Google search to see what's going on in my area. I don't find a lot of things through this, but I have found a couple before, so it really doesn't hurt to just give it a try and see what you find. Remember to be specific about the area you're looking in so that you don't get results for ones you can't physically get to. I don't know about other countries, but the US has a lot of towns that share the same name, so just pay attention to what you're applying to, and be mindful of your travel abilities and limitations. I would recommend starting out as close to your home area as possible to start out with and branch out from there. The more markets you work with, the more connections you'll make, and the more leads you'll find. At a certain point, you might even start getting specifically invited to apply to things, because the more you get out there, the more known you become to others within your scene. Don't underestimate the power of word of mouth. I've been directly recommended as a vendor by those I've worked with before to those I haven't, and I've helped facilitate relationships between fellow creatives and markets I've worked with that they'd never heard of before. People talk, and you never know where it might lead. It could be a really beautiful thing. It can be a little daunting sometimes trying to figure out how to go about vending, but some important things you'll want to consider first include, but are not limited to, do I have the money? Most, if not all, markets and events will require you to pay some sort of table or spot fee, which is charged in order to help run the event itself. On average, I generally have to pay somewhere around $60 per spot, but some I've paid less, and a couple I've paid much more. You'll also need to factor in how you'll be traveling to get there, whether you need gas for your car or need to pay fare for public transportation. Sometimes I'll travel quite a long distance, and that brings toll fees into the equation. You'll also need money in order to create the stock you'll be selling in the first place, whether that be getting something printed or materials to make soap or things like that. Sometimes things you don't expect will come up because life is just sometimes like that, so you'll want to take just a bit of time to make sure you've taken all of that into account and know where you stand there. These costs do add up real quick, so be sure to keep track of what you're spending where. Do I have the time? Most, if not all, of these events will take place on a weekend. This can get tricky if you have a job that requires you to work or be available on these days. I know, I've been there. Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot to be done about this, since it's simply smarter to hold them then rather than a Tuesday or Thursday. I was able to work relatively well with my previous job on this, but sometimes I just couldn't get out of working that date and had to give up the event, which sucked, but again, not much you could do. Working these issues out is going to be entirely dependent on your individual situation and circumstance, so there isn't a lot of advice I can give here beyond just having a talk with your boss about it. Am I properly prepared? Something really important to note here is that you may be required to be legally registered as a business in order to sell, and they may ask for proof of this in the form of official documentation. Always double check this, and if it doesn't state this anywhere in their rules, directly ask them. Better to be safe than sorry. And if you're a food vendor, that brings all sorts of special certifications and such that I simply do not have the knowledge for. Outside of this, most events will usually require you to bring your own setup, which at its most basic will be a table, a chair, an identifier, and whatever you're selling. By identifier, I mean a sign that states your business name. Some choose to simply go under their own name, which is fine, but again, you'll want to at least have something people can look at and be able to identify who you are. Some events will further require a tent, and while this usually refers to a 10-foot by 10-foot, others will be okay with smaller sizes, but again, you'll need to check directly with them on that. I also highly recommend having a tablecloth of some kind, because not only does it look a lot nicer, but in some cases you might even get told specifically by the organizers that you need one. We'll go a little more into setting up your display in just a little bit, but for now we'll leave it there. Another thing to sit down and consider before you get started is the fact that this is still a job at the end of the day, even if it might not look like a typical one. Not only does vending become very physically demanding at times, but it could be a drain on you mentally and emotionally as well. It's basically just an altered version of the quote-unquote regular retail jobs that you're probably already familiar with. But in this case, you're not just a worker, but the operator and owner as well. It's a big undertaking from start to end, even when starting out super small, so just be mindful of this and consider your own strengths and weaknesses and how they may interact with the process as you go. Can I follow the rules? This might seem a little obvious, but it can't be overstated how important it is to read and reread and then triple check the rules that come with each event, both in applying to and working in it. Once you've been accepted to a market, you will usually receive an email, whether that be immediately upon getting accepted or as the date of it gets closer, which will contain instructions for the day of, as well as the rules that need to be followed in order for things to run smoothly. This will talk about things like what time setup begins and what the cutoff for arrival is, what time to begin packing up, how to find your spot, etc. Any questions you might have will likely be answered there, and if you still have questions, always just go ahead and ask. If you can't work an event after all, the sooner you realize this and inform the organizers, the better. Please, for both your sake and theirs, keep track of dates and times and stay in communication if anything happens. So we found a market we really vibe with and want to apply to, but where do we start? Each one will have its own way of doing things, and you can always find instructions on how their process works either on the post announcing applications itself or their main page or website. If you truly can't seem to find any, contact the organizer politely through email or DM, whichever they state they prefer. If a page says, "Do not DM," then don't DM them. There's probably an email listed. Common methods of collecting vendor applications are through email or through Google Form or something similar. In my experience, you're way more likely to run into either of these methods than you are to others, but again, pay attention to specific instructions because it may be different from the norm. The application itself is usually pretty simple and straightforward. Pretty much every market I've applied to has been good about laying out exactly what they want from you and how they want it. This will usually also be where they outline specific rules for the event itself. Something I forgot to mention earlier is that some events want you to have insurance coverage at the time of the event, at the very least a one-day insurance policy. I've only done this once, but while the process to obtain it was easy, it cost me more money than I really wanted to spend, so keep an eye out if you want to avoid it. The usual things you'll need to fill in on these applications will include your legal name and business name, if applicable, where you're based out of, what category of wares you sell, and what your website and or socials are. You'll also probably be asked to give a brief description of your brand, so who you are and a little more about the specifics of what you sell. I find it really handy to write one up and keep it saved in my notes app alongside all my links and anything else I want to have readily available. So that way I could just do the old copy and paste instead of having to type it all out over and over and over again. I like to rewrite my general description every few months or so to keep things fresh and accurate, because I'm always evolving and so is my business, so my description should reflect this. The way some of these markets work is that you basically buy your spot outright and submit payment with the application, but others will have an application period where anyone can submit themselves, and then they curate the final lineup out of those submissions. This means you'll have to wait a bit until they go through and make their picks, in which case you will receive an acceptance message. Upon acceptance, that's usually when you'll be required to pay your table fee to secure your spot, but sometimes they might have you bring payment the day of. Remember to check your messages and email at least once a day, and always check your spam too. Some markets will send out rejection emails, but others won't. That will usually be clarified somewhere on their website or page or posts. Keep a list, whether on your phone or physically written down, of everything you apply to so that you don't get confused and accidentally double book yourself. I have a notebook that I keep specifically for my business, and in there I list out all my monthly goals, my market schedule, all that. I keep separate lists for each month. One is for events I've applied to but haven't heard back yet, and the other is for ones I've been officially accepted to. For each of these, I not only list the events or market's name and what date they're scheduled for, but also where they're located and how much each table fee is. Additionally, when I do get accepted, I mark down next to them if my fee has been paid yet or not, so I could just tell from a quick glance. If traditional planners work good for you, definitely get one if you don't have one already. It'll save a lot of headaches. Be mindful of deadlines. Even if an application is still available, that doesn't necessarily mean they're still actively accepting them. When in doubt, just ask. On to the events themselves. Let's run a quick simulation on what an average market day looks like for me, just to give you a better idea of this process as a whole. By the morning of an event, I'll usually have my car all packed up with everything so that I'm ready to go as soon as possible. This lets me relax a little more because I'll then only need to worry about getting myself ready and doing smaller things like filling up my gas tank and contending with whatever traffic has in store for me that day. I try to get to the location as close to the start of setup time as possible because I prefer to take my time in getting everything out and set up. I do not like to stress out about small things like that, especially when the day hasn't even officially started yet. Setup times will differ from market to market, and you will have some leeway on when to show up, but I really urge you to avoid later arrivals as much as you possibly can, if only for your own peace of mind. If you end up getting there like 20 minutes before the scheduled start time, you could be turned away by the organizers and not get to vend at all, so just be careful. Once I'm all done with that, I like to take some time and walk around to check everyone else out and visit the people that I already know who are also selling. This also gives me the opportunity to use the bathroom if I need, have a snack, take a little break, and just try to get into a good headspace to really be able to take on the day. I'll usually have my partner with me on these, so there's always someone at my table. But even when I'm working alone, my immediate neighbors have all always been really awesome about keeping watch for a few minutes if I needed to go do or grab anything. And I always return the favor to those that ask me. Never be afraid to ask if you need help. Throughout the course of the event, depending on how long it is and how busy it gets, I'll try to take another opportunity to walk around if I can, just to get a breather and check in on what else is going on. But sometimes I just won't get that chance and stay at my table the entire duration. I almost prefer these ones because it doesn't allow me to even really realize I'm tired until everything's over, but it is nice to have a slower pace every so often. Regardless of where I'm able to go, I still try to take video clips and pictures of all the different happenings that I will later use to make a recap video for my socials. As I make sales, I keep a running list of each transaction for that specific event, in which I also list the table fee and how much gas it took to get me there. At the end of the day, once I'm back home, I add everything up, subtract the fees, and get my final total for that day. Everyone keeps track of these differently, and there's almost definitely an easier way, but I just find it easier for myself right now to separate everything into individual events, and then combine everything later at tax time. Experiment a little and see which way works best for you. As the market draws to a close, I will pull out all my storage, and then once it's finally closed, I'll pack everything up in reverse of how I set it up. Stock goes away, then display pieces, then tablecloths and sign, then table, chairs, and tent. It's best practice to have absolutely everything packed up and ready to go before you go get your car if you're using one. This enables you to have a much easier time leaving because literally all you'll need to do is shove everything back in and be on your way. This also allows others to get their cars in sooner because you'll be out of the way faster. I see plenty of people pull their cars up first and then pack up, and I'm not saying that you can't do that, but I am saying that it's a lot less efficient and it can end up being super annoying, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you that's also trying to load up and head home. I've talked a little bit about setting up your display, but let's take a closer look now at how to generally go about it. Much like the artists and makers having their own personalities, displays come in an incredibly wide range of styles, and there isn't a truly incorrect way to do it. Depending on what you sell, it might be small and minimalistic, or it could be huge and take up your entire space. It's all up to what you like best and what works best for you and your customers. I've inserted some clips of past events I've done throughout this video, and you might have noticed that I don't actually stick to one singular way of setting up shop. I'm one of those people that just isn't very good at planning things down to the very last detail, and I prefer being able to physically see my spot in front of me before I start arranging. But I know plenty of artists that are the opposite and put a lot of time and thought into their displays at home in the weeks and even months leading up. I know we're repeating a lot, but again, experiment with different things and you can decide what you like from there. But moving on to the finer details, here's a list of things that I always keep with me no matter where I'm going. A few different baskets and shelves. I thrift all of my display pieces, so nothing matches nicely with each other except for the color, but you know what they say about reducing and reusing. I don't always use everything that I have, but that's just the beauty of it. When you have a few different options, you can decide what you want to use right then and what to keep to the side just in case. If you have the ability to, you can even custom make your own pieces. No rules, just vibes. A business card holder. Or in the case like right now where I've run out of physical cards, I've printed out a copy of my Linktree QR code and laminated it to tape to my table, so that way people still have a way to find me later when everything's all done. A card reader and at least one app available to take non-cash payments. This isn't strictly necessary, and you can absolutely get by doing cash only, but not everyone carries a lot of cash, and not every event will have an ATM readily available, so I like to be ready for anything. There are a few readers on the market right now, but I currently use my Square one, and I also printed out and laminated the QR codes to both my Venmo and my Cash App. Price signs. I used to have one big list that I kept in one of those plastic display frames that you see in stores, but I've recently changed that up and switched over to multiple individual signs. This is because I noticed that people were having trouble spotting it and keeping track, and I think that's mostly due to the fact that I sell a wide variety of items, not just one or two, where one sign might have worked better. I hand drew each of my signs and then laminated them, much like with the QR codes we just talked about. A wheeled cart. This is actually a very new addition to my life, very graciously provided by my partner, but I can't tell you how much time and backbreaking it saved me. While some events are super easy and let you pull up right to your spot in your car for setup, this won't always be the case, and sometimes you'll have to walk a longer distance than you might want or be prepared to. It is an additional investment on top of everything else, but if you do a lot of markets like I've been doing this year, it's absolutely worth it. Ask around too. It's possible you might have a family member or a friend willing to lend you theirs for free. And last, carry bags. I sell things of varying sizes, and sometimes people really go wild, so it definitely helps to have at least some bags available for people. Depending on what you sell, these could be teeny tiny or huge, or you might just need sleeves if you mostly sell prints and other flat items like that. The ones I use right now have handles and are fairly small, but big enough to hold a coffee mug, plus a number of smaller items, so they work for me. In the future, I do want to expand my range, and I plan to start offering different size bags to address that once we get there. Take it from someone who's been there, you could still do a lot with a little, so don't get discouraged if your table looks a little plain at first. It's all about you and what you make first and foremost, and the $1 million display can always wait. So we've gotten our priorities straight, we've gotten prepared, and we're ready to get started. But what are some things that I've learned and picked up along the way that have ended up helping me out? I don't think I need to tell you this, but sometimes people are rude and steal things from tables. It doesn't happen all the time, and I'm not saying it's a 100% guarantee it'll happen to you, but unfortunately, people just absolutely suck sometimes and think they're above paying for your hard work. There isn't really a way to prevent all theft, but there are a number of ways to help lessen those chances, and a lot of these ways involve your display. For example, I don't display my entire stock of enamel pins because getting those made is one of the most expensive parts of my inventory. So, I took a simple 5x7 shadow box, some craft foam, and a lot of tape, and behold, a single piece display that I could place within my reach and not have to worry as much about. My stock I keep with the rest of my storage, bags, etc., so that I could still easily grab them when someone wants to buy one. I don't have a complete and exhaustive list of all the different ways one can mitigate theft, nor do we have enough time to go into them, but lots of artists have posted their own methods, so it should be fairly easy, especially in this day and age, to find ways that suit you. Next up is actually arguably the most important. Bring your own water and/or beverage of your choosing, and snacks. It's so important to stay hydrated and energized, just in general, but especially when you're working. Outdoor events in particular can get rough at times, and I've come pretty close to fainting during a couple of the summer ones when the sun is blazing down and I've been messing around with the tent and table. Events will sometimes have food options available, but not always. And I don't know about you, but when I get hungry, I'm not in the mood to talk to people. And I don't think I need to clarify why it's important to do that when you're vending. Equally as important for your outdoor events is to bring sunscreen and bug spray. I'm very bad at remembering sunscreen, and I've paid for it dearly at times. The only thing more exhausting than packing up at the end of an event when you're already beat is packing up at the end of a day when you're already beat and you've got a killer sunburn. If you're feeling anxious about working one of these by yourself, ask a friend or your partner or another loved one if they would be willing to go with you and help out. As previously mentioned, my partner joins me on a lot of these because thankfully he actually likes helping me out, and once everything is put together, we get to just hang out and have a fun time like we would on any other day. There's been a running joke actually with all these markets I do that we're all exactly the same, artists that enlist our partners, because it really does appear to be the case that this is a very normal and common thing. I don't know, I just think it's sweet. Our best friend also likes to come to as many of these as they can and hang out behind the table with us, which is always fun. You don't have to go it alone. Another big thing to always keep in your mind no matter what the place is, not every event will be a complete success. Sometimes the weather won't cooperate and will either rain you out or become too hot for people to walk around. Sometimes it's the event itself. Things that get put on for the very first time probably aren't going to get the same traffic and attendance as one that's more established and has gone on multiple years. People don't know what they don't know. The most you could do is spread the word as far as you can, alongside your fellow vendors and organizers. Share the flyer everywhere you usually post online, post about it in local groups if you're allowed, and you can even print the flyer out and put them in physical spaces where allowed. Some events will even just straight out give you flyers they've printed themselves to hand out. I'm personally notorious for bugging the ever-loving hell out of my collective following whenever I have a market coming up, because how else will they know about it? Let's repeat. People don't know what they don't know. And even then, when you and everyone involved has done everything you all possibly can, sometimes it still won't work out for reasons beyond your control. Recessions, certain times of the year like January and August, people changing their priorities and their spending habits are all things you can't really do anything about. This can definitely be a real kick to your confidence, but try to remember that it's nothing personal. It doesn't mean what you make or do isn't good, and it doesn't mean you should just stop and give up. Creating is a beautiful thing, whether it makes you money or not. One thing that I've been doing for a while that I mentioned earlier is putting together recap videos of most of the events that I work. I'll try to get clips of a little of everything, from my own setup process to the full lineup of people vending there, to how big the crowd sometimes gets, and most importantly, all of the dogs that blessed my presence that day. I cut 2 different versions, one shorter and one slightly longer, and I cross-post them to my different socials over the course of the week following the event. The reason I make 2 different links is that some of these apps and sites like Facebook will only let me upload to about a minute, while others like TikTok will let me upload a little longer. There's tons of apps out there, but at the moment I use CapCut because it's so simple to use and it's mostly free. They also do have a premium version of it too, if you so wish to buy it. Not sponsored, but I should be with how much I use it. These are both fun to make because it's almost like a video scrapbook of that day, and they also help bring awareness for people that are either visiting my page for the first time, or finding one randomly through their For You pages or through the tags. So even after a market is over, you could still bring it to people's attention so that they know for the next time it happens. It's also a really great way to showcase anything you sell at these events in one place for people who aren't already familiar with you. Even when things don't turn out the way you wanted, even when they don't live up to expectations, even when you end up taking a loss instead of making a profit, it's not a personal failure or a direct reflection of you and what you do. Life isn't fantastic all of the time, and neither is vending. Don't let it get you down too bad. Just take some notes of what happened, where you might be able to grow from there, what you can change, and move on to the next thing. There's always another event, always another market, always another chance. And it's not all negatives anyway. There's tons of ways in which it can be a really fun and fulfilling experience. I've met more artists and done more exploring this past year than I have in the last 10, and I really feel like I've grown as a person as a result. I love seeing the vast spectrum of what people can do and being able to draw my own inspiration from it. I'm a pretty firm believer in community, and there's a lot of love to be had if you just start talking to people and open your heart a little bit. Or maybe that's just me and I'm done. Anyway, I hope you found this video useful, even a little bit, and learned something. Most of all, I hope it's encouraged you to pursue vending if you've really been considering it, and I hope it's made you feel a little bit better about getting started. If there's something I missed that you would have loved to see included or go into more detail about, or if you have your own tips that you've picked up along your own vending journey, I'd love to hear all about it in the comments. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing and giving it a like, or don't, I can't force you. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much, and I hope to see you again real soon. Until we meet again.